Welcome to Coast AM's YouTube channel. I'm George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe. Also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and coasttocoastam.com. Become a Coast Insider for ad-free access to thousands of shows you'll really enjoy. Werewolves, dire dogs, chupacabras. You know, for many, these creatures are works of fiction, the products of misconception and overactive imaginations. But if these stories are indeed myths, then why are so many of these details so similar? And why do so many of these witnesses repeat the same thing over and over again? I know what I saw. That's the name of the latest book by Linda Godfrey, and she's next on Coast to Coast AM. I Know What I Saw, modern-day encounters with monsters of new urban legend and ancient lore. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Linda Godfrey with us, one of the most respected authorities on anomalous animals and paranormal phenomena all over the country, specifically Wisconsin. She has investigated wolfmen, Bigfoot, and other strange creatures for more than 25 years. She's had a number of her own field encounters, and as a journalist, she was the first to break the story of a terrifying werewolf-like monstrosity lurking in the shadow-shrouded forests around Elkhorn, Wisconsin's Bray Road. I remember that story well. Welcome back, Linda Godfrey.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be back.
How have you been?
Very well, thank you. A little busy. This book took me a good 3 years, including all the publisher's time, that they need to work their magic upon it. So it's feeling really good to have it out there. The actual release date is tomorrow. Actually, it's today, now that I think about it. Yeah, so it's
perfect timing.
Exactly.
Hey, before we get into it, the Beast of Bray Road, give everybody a little highlight about that, because that was one of our first times we had you on, and what a great story.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's what really catapulted me, although it was a slow catapult at first. It took a while, into this rendezvous with cryptozoology that I've had my last, 27 years I think it's been. So it was 91, 92 when I had a job at the local newspaper. And they offered me the job of reporter. I was doing cartoons for them and artwork. And my very first week into the job, somebody said, "Hey, did you hear that people out on Bray Road, which is a 3 to 4 mile long stretch just east of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, did you hear that out there they're saying there's something like a werewolf?" And I laughed. I thought, what joke is this? They're trying to get the new reporter, ha. And as I asked around town, I found out, no, there really were people who were saying there was a werewolf on Bray Road. And I happened to drop in on the county animal control officer about another interesting thing, which was that we were having mutilated dogs found.
Jeez.
And some other strange things like that. And I said, have you heard about this thing, people saying they saw out on Bray Road that looks like a werewolf? And he said, oh, you mean this? And he opened up his file drawer and pulled out a manila folder marked werewolf, which...
he was on top of this one, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really was. People have been calling him and saying, I saw this thing. I don't know what it is. But if there were such a thing as werewolf, that's what I saw. It was standing, it was between 5 and 7 feet tall, covered with dark, shaggy hair, pointy ears on top of the head, a long muzzle, and walking on its tiptoes is the way they usually describe people. The way that people usually describe these things walking. And they say its legs were bent backwards, which means they're looking at the dog's hock, which would be our heel. And it's carried up off the ground because they do walk on their toe pads. And when I went to visit the people who were saying this, I was very impressed. I hadn't expected much, but as it turned out, they were a very diverse bunch, women, children, older, younger, blue-collar, white-collar, several farmers, one man with a very high clearance from an area major air station. And I thought, they don't seem like they're lying. And furthermore, I thought, why would anyone who was just doing a hoax or trying to have some fun, leave all their contact information with the authorities because, of course, if anything happened or they were charged with fraud or anything, they would know right where to go find them. People just don't usually do that. So we thought it would just be a short local story. I was thinking, like local folklore or a campfire. And lo and behold, once the story ran with these witness descriptions, it went, well, we can't say that it went viral back then because the Internet was not what it is now. It went national, was I think how we put it. People were just very excited about it. They began writing me longhand and typed letters that they had to look up the address to the newspaper and send me, and saying, I have seen this myself, or my grandmother's seen it, or somebody. It's not a joke. And 10 years later, after that never stopped happening, where any time that I was on a show of any kind, radio or TV, I would hear from people, and they would tell me their stories, and I felt obligated to keep the lore, as I thought of it, because no one else seemed to be interested. And I decided to write a book thinking that would just stop, all the speculation about it. People would know what it was, and it, in turn, just fueled more. And so here,
right.
I've been I think this is book 18, on just strange people, places, and things. And every time I write more about these creatures, I hear more
stories pop up, don't they?
Exactly. People are just eager to let me know that it's happened to them too, or they want an explanation. And so here I sit, with another book.
Are you convinced, Linda, with all these stories that, one, people are seeing something? Can we all agree on that?
Oh, I think so. I do not claim to know precisely what it is, but it's a thing, as they say today. It's a thing, we might say more specifically, it's some type of phenomenon. It's not any sort of collusion. It's not, there's no such thing as mass hallucination. It's something that is happening to people in all walks of life, usually unexpectedly. Usually the people who are actively looking for it are not the ones who normally see it. It's when your guard is down, when you're not thinking of it, when you have no idea what it is. Those are the people who seem to come upon it and have the sightings and encounters.
And the subtitle of your new book, I Know What I Saw, Modern-Day Encounters with Monsters of New Urban Legend and Ancient Lore. The ancient lore really excites me because something happened to the people of ancient indigenous tribes, Native Americans, wherever they may have been. These people saw creatures too, didn't they?
They did, and we know that from their art and from some of the literate ones, the stories that they've engraved. I think back to the Sumerians, and they have this one creature named, it was one of their gods, I believe, named Pazuzu. He was kind of a very difficult character, some people believe. And Pazuzu was sort of a humanoid bird form, and very much like some of the Thunderbird depictions of the Native Americans and others. And why we now, one of the most recent flaps of any type of unknown creature has been this dozens and dozens and dozens of sightings of something that looks like a giant bird bat with sort of a humanoid center. And they've been mostly over the Chicago area, surprisingly enough. And people are comparing it to the Mothman, but we've just had that same issue, same description back in Sumerian times, and then you go to the Egyptians, and they're also having all of the humanoid creatures that we refer to as monsters, things with dog heads or dog bodies, the ibis, a type of a bird man. They all have this idea that somehow there are parts of animals, parts of men that can go together and create these unusual creatures.
A lot of people have thought that some of these creatures could be dimensional. I've ruled that out, Linda. How about you?
You mean coming from another dimension, or?
Yeah, that they're coming through portals and things like that.
Well, I would not say that I ruled it out, but maybe there's just a better way of putting it, that they're not. I don't believe that they're extraterrestrials from another planet myself. That just doesn't seem to have enough evidence. But there's a way of describing it that many of my Native American friends I've talked to in different tribes, they're not all exactly the same, of course. They have each has their own unique culture, but most of the time it goes something like, they believe that particularly the upright canines and the Bigfoot and these big spirit birds, and now lately I've been hearing from them the Black Panther-like creatures also. They say these are originally spirit beings, and that they can come to this place where we are, the earthly place, in order to procreate, eat, they have all kinds of things to show us that they do have solidity. They leave tracks and footprints. They can certainly leave claw marks or bashes in people's cars, especially some of these larger canine types. And so we know that they're not just ghostly type things. But on the other hand, there are altogether too many incidents where people have somehow emptied a clip of ammunition into one, or hit it with a car or whatever, where nothing happens to the creature. They kind of, redouble and then straighten themselves off and hurry off into the woods. It's not like you would expect, though, with a normal earth creature. If it's like I'm thinking of a bear, especially a grizzly bear or a big cougar. If they want to see you as prey, and they see you as any sort of a menace to their territory or their offspring, they'll come after you. We have that happen all the time, not super frequently, but every year you hear bear reports or whatever. These other things don't do that. In 27 years, I've only had one person tell me that they actually had bodily harm or physical hurt from it. And this was a man who was on a hiking path in a national forest up in Quebec. He was just out for a lark. He didn't have a gun or anything like that with him, and he ran almost literally face to face with an upright wolf-like creature.
And it didn't. In this case, this thing attacked him or defended? What happened? Well,
they came face to face, and he said he's just in shock, and his instinct is to just kind of move forward to the right. And unfortunately, he said it was kind of like, it felt sort of like in a supermarket where you're coming down the market with your cart and somebody else is coming. You kind of go, neither one knows which way to turn. And he said it seemed to be like trying to rush past him, and he sort of jumped a little bit the wrong way, and it ended up grazing him with its mouth had been open, and its fangs were showing, and it grazed him with its fangs, kind of tore his shirt and left a gash in his side. He sent me a photograph of the healed up.
But it could have chomped down on him if it wanted to, I bet.
He said, if it had wanted to get me, it would have just taken me.
It would have torn him apart, yeah.
Yeah, and instead it just, ran for the hills. And that's almost always what happens whenever anybody gets close to one of these things. They act like they want to pursue it. They act like they want it. They'll say, I thought I was lunch, but then it doesn't happen. It just runs off.
What do you think these creatures are, Linda?
Well, they seem to be creatures that can span different energy levels, and it gets into some kind of...
well, and years. They must be breeding because right. What they saw during the ancient days can't be the same creature we're seeing today. It's got to be the offspring of them.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, there's new procreation of one type or another going on here. It's not like there's been just one creature, one of each type of creature since way back in ancient days. There are definitely many reports where people will say, there was one with a smaller one, that I thought was probably an offspring of some type. I had one very credible report from a man who saw, this was in the land between the lakes, between Kentucky and Tennessee, where he saw what he took for a female upright canine with three smaller ones about the same size, all walking on their hind legs, all crossing the road in front of him as he was leaving his campground. So they seem to procreate when they're here, and some of my Native American friends think that perhaps is their main reason. And it's almost as if they want to mimic a powerful animal in order to go about their business, whatever that is.
Though you don't think they're extraterrestrial per se, might they have been dumped here years ago from extraterrestrials?
I would say, knowing what we know about extraterrestrials and the way that the UFOs seem to interact with humans and with other things, with animals too, and since there have been sightings where it appears that some sort of large unknown creature has just debarked from one of these UFOs, it's possible. I always feel it's not up to me to put limits on the universe and how these things can work, but I do try to just observe and see what things seem logical in light of the other things that are known, and then give it my best guess.
How many urban legends are out there, Linda, that are really the real deal?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because there are things that aren't necessarily what they look like, and actually the latest flap of bat-like creatures over and around Chicago is one that I sincerely have my doubts on, because it doesn't follow the sort of description. Well, it follows the description in being a large bat-like creature, although with these things, they never show up next to something so you can tell how big they are. In other large bird and large flying bat incidents that I've investigated, they aren't afraid to be on the road or next to your car. It's usually out of the city. And these ones by Chicago, these things are showing up over the Art Institute and over the fancy downtown areas and certain neighborhoods. They're not out in the liminal or sideline places where these things are usually found. And I have a theory that they're probably, or at least very likely, some type of performance art, because there happens to be a well-known professor from the Art Institute, where my own son went to school, who did kind of like almost living dioramas with mechanical bats that he would take and have sort of a bat cage exhibit with real bats and then these large mechanical bats that he equipped with some sort of sonar emitting, just the way that they have their echolocation. That was on them in a modified way, and also their wings would flap. They could be remote controlled, and that he started doing those I think around 10 years ago. Well, since then the drones have become really affordable and widespread.
Sure.
And if he could figure out a way to attach a drone to that, he could send here. Maybe not him necessarily. Maybe some students who knew of his work. There are other art schools downtown there too, so it could have been anyone really. I did write to him and never received a response because it just seemed so familiar, so similar to his work. He's also the one and he also has done things with animals in the past. He was famous for supposedly creating a hybrid rabbit with some sort of jellyfish to make it glow like a green color when it was under ultraviolet light. And that story has been somewhat debunked, too.
Linda, first explain what Slender Man is or stick people, and have other cultures seen this thing?
Yes, they have actually, but it's been a while. It's something that feels sort of new, and these stick people, Slender Man type things, they look physically similar. They're tall, very, very thin, like really too thin to be human is how people describe it. They often are wearing hats, in which case they're called hat men. Sometimes you don't see any features on them at all. They're just black, almost like shadows, and then they're called shadow people. So there are different variations of it. But the Slender Man is one that became popular around the early 2010s through this new type of website called Creepypasta. And Creepypasta was sort of borrowed from the old copy and paste instructions of the early computers, where before you had to laboriously type things, and then all of a sudden with computers you could just copy them somewhere else.
Paste it, and off you go.
Exactly. And so that gave kind of a jump start to many literary sites where they had lots of people kind of having fun putting out a starting legend, and then everybody would write their own next incidents or endings to it. And they became kind of these sort of interesting, large communities for people to use on the Internet. Well, one very popular area was horror. And if you started searching for things, you could find names like The Rake, Wendigo, Goatman, Michigan Dogman, Melonhead, and the Six-Legged Centaur was one of my favorites. Slender Man was kind of an eerie one. This idea of these tall, slender things has been around for a while, and in many cultures. There are Native Americans that have these stick people figures. They're somewhat related to deer people, things that people see running on their hind legs down roads. They're tall. They've got very skinny legs like deer. Sometimes they'll have hooves even or horns. And they're considered very much like the water horses of Scotland in some places by some of the Native American tribal people, because they can shapeshift and lure people. They'll see this beautiful-looking woman. They don't notice that she's got hooves, and they go somewhere with her and then end up having terrible things happen. So they're very nervous if they see a very lovely woman running along the road at night trying to signal to stop and pick her up. And maybe some of that has to do also, it's easier to have that sort of thing going on where you've got automobiles, things that are going fast and can take you places, and where you might feel obligated to pick someone up and give them a ride.
Has Slenderman been known, Linda, to try to hurt people directly?
I don't believe that there are sightings of something that looks exactly like Slenderman or the shadow people where people have felt directly hurt. I think particularly with the shadow people are something that are much more widespread and better known. I think they've been around longer than our automobile, computer age creatures or monsters have. And I don't know that it's actually, kind of like the upright canines. They seem very, some people will say they seem demonic even, and yet I don't have the records, and I haven't seen the stories of them actually injuring human beings or even animals.
That's an interesting take. But nowadays with social networking, isn't Slenderman almost like a fad thing?
Yeah, it became really very much a fad in the social networks. And again, the center of these stories were something about it just appealed to these young people who were writing stories. Maybe it is just so scary to think of this really stretched out, thin person that doesn't look like it could be human, and yet there it is, on the roadside or following you or wherever. And although I have to add, I really personally don't have lots of sightings of the Slender Man, if any, myself. A few people I've heard have had reports on it, but generally when there are reports, it's more like the Hat Man or the shadow people. And that also gets into the same sort of thing with animals. For instance, I have had and have been getting increasing numbers of reports of something called the shadow wolf.
The shadow wolf?
Shadow wolf. And these are from people in very diverse places. They haven't heard of one another. It's not something that I've written a lot about, although I've started to. But I know of one place on the edge of a state forest in Wisconsin where I've had 3 separate people write about, they're driving along, and they see this kind of dark thing. It's either alongside the road, in some woods near the road, somewhere where they can just see it, and it has a wolf-like shape, but it's just this dead black color. And they can see eyes. Usually it has a glowing red eye. Sometimes you see the teeth. And it's just huge for any type of actual dog or wolf. Sometimes enormously huge. And usually it just sort of melts into the shadows as they get out of range of looking at it. But that's kind of and they'll just automatically call it. They'll say it was like a shadow wolf. I had one incident. This was actually in my last book, Monsters Among Us, that happened, I believe, in Tennessee, where an entire large family saw this thing. They were all outdoors doing kind of farm chores. They had large vegetable gardens and a corn patch, and they all of a sudden looked and saw this big, shadowy black wolf looking at them from the woods. And they all started kind of yelling. There were children. There was, parents. There was a grandmother. And this thing started just walking across their garden as if they weren't even there. And finally it turned and looked at them. And when it did that, they realized it was like something two-dimensional, because when it turned, there was almost nothing there to see. And then it turned back, and they could see the full side view of it again. And the grandmother, and I interviewed several members of this family, and they all verified what happened and what it looked like. And the grandmother, who I'm not sure how old she was, grabbed some type of farm implement and started chasing toward it, and then it just ran off somehow into the woods.
Amazing. Now, what is the witchy wolf?
Witchy wolf is originally, I thought it would be just sort of a legend. This thing has been known for a long time in a place, it appears in a place called Omer Plains on the east side of Michigan. And about probably 20 years or so ago, there was a writer for an area publication, who David Kulzik, his name is, who wrote kind of a definitive story about what was thought of it at that time. And at that time, it was most often seen in an open area called the Omer Plains. There was a very old cemetery near there, and it was the old trope of teenagers sitting and necking in the car, and then this monster comes up to you, and everybody screams. Sometimes the boys are out of the car, and bad things happen. And they claimed that there were pines all around this area, pine trees, and there would be things heard screaming and whistling in the pine trees. Some people said, well, it's just what pine trees do, is if there's a wind, they kind of, make noises when it runs through the fir branches. And the thing was that it didn't have necessarily to be windy for that to happen. So I looked into that a little bit more, and I was able to go to their historical society and library that they have right there on the grounds. And after inquiring, I was given some copies of some reports that had been written by a former, possibly town historian. They seemed to me that they were half actual accounts and half kind of nonsense put in there. But according to these papers, this all started back in the Civil War, when one of the families sent one of their sons off to fight in a civil war, and he came back with not even much of his remains were left there.
Oh,
and
geez.
He had died in one of the internment camps where the captured soldiers were kept. And when he arrived there, the family buried him. It wasn't a good time of year to do a lot to the grave, so they waited till spring and went out with a party of people to kind of clean up the graves that were out there. And this was in more this happened in slightly more modern times. It was a few years after, I believe. Anyway, they're working on these graves, and they opened up where the box had been put to kind of get it in there better. And to their surprise, there was a she-wolf with puppies. And she came charging out of this grave at the people, who went shrieking back to the town. And now that all sounds like it could be a very easily made-up story, and it could have, but I started by looking up in genealogy and other places, local history records, the names of the people, the name of the people who lost the son's name. I found his regiment and everything, verifying that he was in the Civil War and that he did come back deceased, and was buried in a place. And there was another set of papers that described more modern happenings where there were two couples in a car, and the boys got out of the car because they heard something noisy, and as often happens and this sort of thing I call urban legend, because it's the same actions, that maybe different people, different unknown animals, whatever, but it's the same set of actions that happens, and you see it all over the country in different places. Where, with the teenager, that's one of the major ones. And they got out of the car to hear what these whistling sounds were, and then they started encountering these big, shadowy-looking black dogs. And they were supposedly set there by Native Americans long ago to guard their sacred area, which happened to be the Omer Plains. And when the people would go away, the dogs would too. There was a little additional one where two of these young men were said to have vanished when they went out to look for the witchy wolves, or these howling dogs that were guarding their sacred areas. They just disappeared, and the only thing that was ever found of them was one of them had a belt buckle with his initials on it.
Oh, jeez. And
that was supposed to be the only thing. And I did find people with these family names there. And in such a small community, it's unless it was well known that one person was playing a joke on all the people in town, it's hard to imagine that you could get away with having this publication talking about all these specific people. And I even checked their occupations, George. They had, one was listed as an undertaker, one was listed as a grocer. And so there was kind of a lot to go on in terms of searching them out. But it's really hard to separate, in this case, the fact from the fiction.
It is, yet you have to look at who was involved. And so far, everything seems credible, doesn't it?
Well, the people do, yeah. I didn't find any real answer as to who wrote the historic papers, to And in fact, when in the signing of it, it was a little jokey sounding. I can't remember exactly what they said. But to have this entire saga reaching from the Civil War to present day, and there are still teenagers going out to that area, you know, and parking in to see what's out there. So it really has gone a long way, and still it seems to be added to. And I'm kind of keeping an eye on it to see if there are other stages that it evolves into.
Now, what are dire dogs? Seems to have a lot of dog stories and wolf stories, but what are dire dogs?
Yeah, dire dog is a name that I came up with. We're used to hearing the term dire wolf because those were real animals that went extinct maybe 10,000 years ago, something like that. And anybody familiar with the Game of Thrones TV show on HBO, some of the main mythical characters on that show were dire dogs. They were larger than wolves, and they played a big part in the plot. All of the young people of the North each had their own dire wolf and stayed with them for life. Well, the actual dire wolves, and we have, like I said, thousands of skeletons of these things, especially in Southern California. There are quite a few. And they were very widespread. They were maybe 25% larger than today's largest timber wolf at most. They weren't even all that much bigger, but they were constructed differently. They had very wide heads, and they had these very wide jaws so that they could crunch bone. And ever since people started reporting the Beast of Bray Road to me, all different ones were also sending me encounter stories of these very large animals that were canine, but they had broad heads, they had the large teeth, some of them even had hyena-like ruffs on their neck, and they didn't, for the most part, go on their hind legs. So to me, I couldn't really categorize them as dogmen because that was the main thing about dogmen.
In Arizona, the Navajo people have something called the chindi. What is that?
The chindi is sort of it's actually a really terrifying creature. It's sort of a spirit thing, and it can also change shapeshift, but they're believed to carry, let's say that you have lived a less than exemplary life and you have a lot of bad things or emotions that built up. They will take all that pent-up emotion when a person dies and go about the countryside kind of using it to inflict other woes upon other people. And it varies a little from tribe to tribe. That's generally it. But very often it takes the form of a very large upright cat figure, like a mountain lion.
Is this is it a myth or is there something to this? Because some ancients or Native Americans have created shamanic animals to scare their kids and things like that into being good people.
Right, that's true. And this seems one that it seems you almost have to be one of the tribal people in order to experience it, and they're really terrified of it because people have all sorts of psychological problems and actually some physical hurt sometimes from it. But it's something that's not very well known outside of their stories. I just happened to cross it somewhere.
You've seen your own Bigfoot creature several times out that way, haven't you?
I did, yeah. In the year 2014, I saw what looked like maybe a slightly shorter than usual, like a juvenile size, soft black colored with the round type of head. It didn't have the big crest on its head that the older, larger ones have. Within a mile of each other in different fields, and each time it was doing something else, it was daylight. I was just walking in one instance, the other two. One I was driving, the other my husband was driving. And in all three of these cases, I could not possibly, it wasn't that far away either. It wasn't like just a black blob in the distance. I saw features, not the face because the sun was behind it, and I couldn't see the face. But otherwise, enough to convince me that it was the same thing. It was not a bear. It was way too large to be a black bear or any sized dog or anything like that. And I had a good enough look at it that I just can't come to any other conclusion. I did want to mention, if you don't mind, the dire dogs are really different than these other things because they have a big impact, literally, often on people's cars. They're described as the size of a mini horse or a small pony or a large farm animal like a bull calf. Mm-hmm. So they're very large. Usually they're reported as their shoulders coming up to where the top of the driver's side door is or the hood of the car or truck, and they're not afraid to ride at a pace with the car or the truck and then ram into them. I've had one where they actually got one down into a ditch. Luckily, the people were able to just kind of keep going and get out of the ditch and escape it that way. But they seem to have more reality and more aggressiveness than many of these other things that are more...
Are they trying to get the people in the car?
That's the feeling that the people have, that it wants to somehow get their car pulled over where it can get at them better. And they're so uniform in their descriptions of the size and the looks of these things, and they have that sort of primitive look with the ruffs around the back of their necks and shoulders, those big wide heads, and the big teeth that you see in the older model canines.
That's kind of a scary thing. But these run on fours, right?
They run on all fours, and they're seen all over the place. It's not just a Wisconsin thing, although I do have a bunch of them from Wisconsin, and I've got a number of different encounters told about in the book. But people get very, very frightened because they perceive that this thing is focused on them. It's not just running across the road trying to get away. It's focused on them and their car, and they just wonder what would happen if they did. One woman even had, with her dog, was walking through a Milwaukee park and ran into one, and it didn't chase them, but she felt that they were just this close to that happening. It was watching them very, very intently, just something that looked like a dog. She could see it very plainly, but was just way too big to be one.
Who is Stephen Stanek?
Stephen Stanek is a former newspaper editor and writer for a newspaper in a Wisconsin town called Hillsboro in the western section of the state. It's a very weird part of the state, George, because it's called the driftless area, because the glacier, the last glacier that sort of smoothed out all the cornfields and things, never touched this. It looks, when you're there, it's about an 18-mile radius that looks like you're somewhere in Montana with rocky bluffs and deep valleys. And the thing is, over the past several decades, Steve Stanek started gathering reports of mountain lions about several decades ago, and he's up to well over 150 reports just in this 18-mile radius. And the weird thing is, over half of these creatures are not the usual tan and black. Excuse me, tan and white. They're black creatures, which the locals call black panthers, for lack of a better word. But they're not supposed to be possible. It's not supposed to be possible that mountain lions can be what they call melanistic or black-furred, and yet all of these people are seeing them many times in daylight. There's a huge Amish population. Many of them have reported these things to him. They're out in their fields a lot of the time on foot because they don't use tractors. Other people who are hunters, different types of farmers, even right in town. The last one that we had was early March of this year, and one of the barbers in town was on his back porch and saw what appeared to be a black panther only about 20 feet away from him, so he was quite sure of the size. And again, it was daylight, and it just nonchalantly walked at a brisk pace through his yard and went into another yard, and then he found out that one of his next-door neighbor had two sightings of this thing. So it's like, what is going on in this small area in Wisconsin that we have all these sightings and the DNR denies it?
Yeah. They deny it? Why?
Well, that's the big question. People will say, and that I've had more people regarding this particular phenomenon say, I know what I saw. They tried to tell me I didn't see it. There are possible monetary problems if you declare something a breeding population, then it becomes something you have to create programs for, and it can cost quite a bit of money. Maybe that's part of it. They also have extremely strict. They won't count a sighting unless it's one of their trained people who sees it, or they have a very, very good samples of droppings or something like that they can get DNA from. And if they don't believe that there's enough chance that it was from one, they won't even try the DNA sample. So it has a lot of people, kind of upset because they're being told, no, you didn't see what you saw. You saw something else. You saw a house cat or a beaver or a skunk or something. And people are incensed because mountain lions can get up to 6 to 7 feet long. And people say, I certainly know what a mountain lion looks like. One of the witnesses has several PhDs and was one of the staff people that helped run the Florida Panther Project, which brought large, pumped-up, very healthy mountain lions into Florida to help beef up their population there. And she's one who saw one of these things in perfect daylight right in front of her truck. She stopped and watched it walk through, and she said, she saw so many panthers and mountain lions that she can tell what she's seeing.
Okay, let's go to the phones. Wayne is truck driving in Kentucky to get us started. Hi, Wayne. Go ahead.
Hey, hello. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I have this 45-year-old memory of this instance. I lived about a mile from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Fairborn. But I had this memory. I was about 4 to 5 years old, and there was this shadow man, and he was also a hat man. I was outside playing around the house in the window box around the basement window from the shoulders up. And this was in the middle. This was daytime. I'm running around, and there's this shadow man, down in the window box by the basement window. And I don't remember what he said to me, but I have this impression burned into my memory of the experience. And, the only thing I can think is, like it was ominous, dark, foreboding thing to, like, keep me on the straight and narrow, to make me live a good life or something. Because, I'm not a Christian. I'm not I don't believe in hell, so I don't think it was the devil or anything like that. But
how old were you, Wayne?
I would have been 4 to 5 years old, because I don't think I had even gotten into kindergarten yet. But the Jackie Earl Haley character from the Watchmen movie?
Yeah.
It was kind of like that.
All right, Linda, let's bring you in on this.
It doesn't surprise me that you were that age, because for some reason children do seem to be the ones who see these creatures just as much as the adults, if not more. And I have another similar story from a boy who was about the same age that you were, who saw one come into his bedroom and was at the end of his bed and went screaming and told his mother, and she believed him because he described such a detailed thing. But it was terrifying to him. You don't sound like this thing really terrified you so much at the time, or am I hearing that wrong? But the age fits perfectly. It's very often children who see these things.
Were you scared at all, Wayne?
It hit me to the core. Just talking about it right now, it's deep seated in the core of my body. It's giving me those chills just remembering it and actually talking about it.
You sound more scared now than when you were 4. Am I right?
I might be. I don't know, but I would think it was like an interdimensional thing or something, because it's just that it kind of it looked like that like an outline of Dick Tracy or that Jackie Earl Haley character. But
and Slender Man, Linda, would have been around during that era, right?
No, not Slender Man, but
Hat Man?
The Hat Man seems to date back at least that far, and I do get reports from the Hat Man, and some people take it for just a black ghost figure. People just are unsure of what it can be, just like this gentleman, because it's something kind of unfamiliar.
Indeed. Wayne, thanks for that story. Appreciate it. It's great to have that kind of memory at 4 years old, too. East of the Rockies, Luke in St. Charles, Missouri. Hey, Luke, go ahead.
Hey, Norrie. So I want to relate a couple stories here. The first one was when I was a small child, about 3 or 4, that would have been about 83 or 84, respectively. I was living in Tacoma, Washington, and I was wandering outside, and I seen like a whole crowd of people outside a neighbor's house looking in like a side window. So I walked in, I walked around to see what they was looking at, and I saw what I believe to this day looked like some kind of a tiger man sitting at a desk, kind of casually smoking a cigarette.
Jeez.
Yeah.
A tiger man. Would costume, Linda, or something real?
Well, did it look like it had any sort of a costume on it? I'm talking to the witness, or could you explain a little more? Why did he seem a tiger man? What features were man and what features were tiger?
The face, and it seemed to have very short fur. It was, had like a tiger-like pattern on it, and it also had like claws at the ends of the fingertips.
And Luke, you said other people were looking in on this thing too. Did they seem in awe or something like that?
Oh yeah, they were fascinated. So that's the first story I got to relate. And then when I was a little older, maybe about 7, I was living in Illinois at that time, and I was walking through this old field, because I saw something on the horizon that I wanted to get a closer look at. And I'm walking that way, and then I stumble across these tracks, in the dirt where, it had like rained like a couple days before that. And that's when I think the tracks were put there, because they were very, very deep. And the front part of the track looked distinctly dog-like. I mean, with the pads and the claw marks and everything. But then the back part of the track seemed to have like the curve of like the arch of a foot, and then like a diminished heel. It wasn't quite as deep as the rest of the footprint. And I've
seen those prints
as far as I know, and it just disappears. And then I thought that's weird, so I tried to backtrack it, and I backtracked it as far, as I could go there, only about like 40 feet, and it also just disappears. Like it starts out of nowhere and ends in nowhere.
And you said you saw feet like that, Linda?
I know exactly what he's talking about. This was on East Fitzsimmons Road, just right on the edge of Milwaukee, where several people had a large dogman jump out of a field at them as they were walking. It runs right down to Lake Michigan, and they were just having kind of a nighttime walk. It's not lit by streetlights or anything. And I went there. I was able to go within a couple of days and found pretty much exactly what you found. There was an area of mud where it had rained and then hardened, and I have really good pictures that I took of it. I even sent them to the DNR. But it had a large toe pads with claws, and then the back print. And the way that that's actually made is they are usually walking on their toe pads, but then when they want to spring at something, go after a deer or something like that, and there were deer prints here. And I could see where the deer had dug in and sprung out, and then this creature had leaned back to get the right angle so he could, or she, whatever it was, could jump out too. And then it was like it was chasing the deer for a little bit. And then it just sort of stopped. There was a big tussle mark and some grass, I think, which stopped that one. But other people have also reported seeing different kinds of prints that just stop and start in the middle of nowhere. I had that happen right in the middle of a snowfield a couple of years ago on a farm where I've been helping them try and figure out what's going on in their property.
What would you say is the strangest creature that has come your way in terms of stories? Oh,
wow. Well, it has to be, people have started reporting this, what they call a cat dog or a dog cat. And, I can't find any early correlation for that. They say it has a face that reminds them of a cat, but it's got the build of a dog, and usually it's on its hind legs. And again, this is sort of a California or southwestern or southern state thing more than other parts of the U.S. for some reason where people are reporting it. And that is just sort of baffling to me, because really nothing about this makes sense. And yet they meet it right out in full daylight on the trail. And then many times they'll feel it's following them after that.
You make a little reference to Art Bell as well. You had one of the callers years ago, Linda, that must have called you, huh?
Oh, yeah. It's wonderful. The things people call into these shows are just fantastic.
Oh, it's you could write books based on the calls.
Totally. Oh, yes. You should do that.
Well, that's not a bad idea coming in. Of all the monsters that you've heard about, which one for you remains the most perplexing?
Actually, I would have to say Bigfoot, because he's so much more there than almost any of the other unknown creatures. Really, there are lots and lots of Bigfoot sightings. And he is so close to human in his appearance and behaviors, and yet not human. So, something that is just so close to so many people, and there are so many sightings of it, and yet we don't have physical proof that we can put forward that we know of. It just makes it almost maddening. It's like so so close yet so far.
And are there still sightings, for example, of the Beast of Bray Road, this creature still running around out there?
Yeah, there actually are sightings of wolf-like creatures, but there are lots of other things that are equally as frightening. There are strange, unexplained lights, and people seeing sets of red eyes going through the tall brushes, and just a whole bunch of other phenomena.
Let's go to Eric, truck driving in Indiana, to get this segment rolling. Hello, Eric.
George!
My ears, Eric, my ears.
I tried to tone it down, George. You know who
All right.
This is Eric, the mind control guy. Anyway, before I get to my question, I'd like to thank you, your staff, and everybody listening that came to work tonight. You're good Americans. And next thing I'd like to know, I didn't know if the good lady has ever maybe gotten together with another crypto researcher, Lyle Blackburn, and maybe did a team effort. And my main question is, with my background, George, I have memories that I wouldn't wish on anybody. And with that said, I would like to know if the good lady has ever stumbled on to the fact, or maybe however you want to put it, are some of these creatures, not Bigfoot, he's been around for, as many centuries as anybody can remember, but the more recent ones like the Beast of Bray Road, Lizard Man, and all these other different creatures, is it very, very possible that some of these obscure creatures that have been popping up in the last 80 years were actually created in a lab and either released or escaped?
Take that one first, Linda. What do you think?
Well, you can't deny that we are on the verge of amazing laboratory methods to change not just creatures but life itself in some ways. We can go in and we know the whole genome of so many animals and, of course, humans that we can slice and dice. They have this new method called CRISPR where they can, move around the DNA portions, and we can turn them on, turn certain traits on and off, like clicking a light back on and off. So, and I also have this credo that if it's possible, if it seems possible to be done, if people have completed enough work to do something and a human wants to do something like this and has the means somewhere, it will be done. We may think that head transplants are something far off in the future, but I quote a Russian scientist who as of 2017, which is only 2 years ago, claimed that he could do it and was just kind of waiting to get permission. But there are lots of places in the world where people don't necessarily follow the same ethics we do, or who knows if we actually are. There are many closed laboratories where other sorts of things are going on. So I would never say never. I think there's a little bit too much quickness to jump to that explanation when somebody finds a kangaroo that has been drowned and the fur is removed and its features have been contorted and changed a little bit by the water erosion and other fishes that may be coming in to eat it or whatever. They usually look very different after they've been through that process. But as far as things being done in a lab, it's hard to say no, because I believe that we in most countries are far more advanced than the general population is allowed to find out.
The island of Dr. Moreau, huh?
Well, I don't know if I'd go. But the trouble is,
never know.
At least that was a confined space. We're talking about pretty much global.
And he wanted to know if you know crypto Lyle Blackburn by any chance.
I do. I count Lyle as a good friend, and we've collaborated on some things in each other's books, and he's a great guy.
Do you know Lauren Coleman by any chance?
I do. I've met Lauren several times. I was a speaker.
Great crypto guy.
At his annual conference, and have met and chatted with him in person numerous times.
Let's go to Wayne in Tacoma, Washington. Hi, Wayne.
Good morning, Sir George.
Hi there.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, you just mentioned the animals or head transplants. I read years ago about a monkey that had a head transplant, and they were able to keep it alive for I don't know how many hours, and it had eye movement and mouth movement and that. But with the technology, I don't know. I think it was 15 or 20 years ago, they weren't able to keep it alive for a long time. About mid to late 1980s. My wife and myself and my family would always go to kids camp up near Blue Lake, Camp Davidson, and we'd do counseling or night watch. And I was on night watch this one week between midnight and 8 in the morning, and I'd go out every half an hour or so and do a round around the camp. And I went out to the far extent of the camp on a dirt road by where all the kids' cabins were in that, and was coming back and had my mag light flashlight with me, carry a sidearm concealed weapon just like you do, George. And I heard a noise up in the woods, so I aimed my flashlight up in the woods, and I saw two black forms, and took a second for my eyes to adjust. But right away, from those black forms, I saw brilliant flashing orange eyes. And then, I was expecting to see, white fur, but no, it was black fur. Two leopards in near Bend, Black Lake's near Bend, or the lake is near Bend, Blue Lake is near Bend, Oregon, not too far from Bend, Oregon. And that's kind of an unusual area, I think, for panthers to be. And I just slowly kept my light on them and slowly backed out for about 150 to 200 feet, slowly turned around and slowly walked away. Got back to the camp headquarters where everybody, meets and sits and has coffee and their donuts and stuff. And, I sat down and had my coffee and told the people about it. And they just kind of, sure, and they couldn't believe it. And I was embarrassed to call the forest ranger. And thinking back about it, I probably should have.
Did you say, I know what I saw?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, there was a time before the 1900s decimation of most of the big cats, or forcing them westward, when jaguars and mountain lions roamed all over the United States, southern Canada, and down into, Mesoamerica. So the fact that, I also think that animals are more resilient than we know, and that they find a way to survive even when they think they've totally left the place, and that mountain lions are so elusive that even scientists call them ghost cats. So it doesn't surprise me that you saw some there, other than the fact that most people just don't ever get to see them. They can be 3 feet away from you, and you're not seeing them because they just blend in so well.
Absolutely. Let's go to Lindsay in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Hi, Lindsay.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hey,
Hi.
George. Hey, Linda.
Hi.
Great show.
Thank you.
Yes. I would love to invite you both to dinner over here on the East Coast sometime.
What's for dinner?
Yeah.
Well, I know time is running out, but you're just going to have to let me know what you like, and then I'll figure something out. But
no roadkill, all right?
Roadkill, maybe it could be. You never know. You never know around here.
All right, go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah. Anyway, I love the title of Linda's book, and
Thank you.
let me know where to get it from and when, and is it Amazon or what? But before you let us know about that, I just want to let you know that in a small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains back in the mid-'60s, I encountered a creature.
What was it?
You can guess if you want.
A Bigfoot?
White.
I would guess a Bigfoot.
Well,
no,
I don't want to call him Bigfoot. More like the white one.
Like the Yeti?
Yes. Abominable snowman.
Abominable snowman. In your neck of the woods?
Actually, when you have a dream, it's soon forgotten. And I was 5, maybe 4, 5, 6, maybe.
Young age again, yeah.
I'll never forget it. People that I have confronted, it was just a dream. But how could you forget something that you saw vividly? I mean, this was vivid.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
White, or was it like a light silvery mix of hair?
It was bright white, 20 feet away or less, beautiful eyes. I wasn't scared. I was just intrigued. It was just like, well, what is that thing?
There's a pattern here, too, Linda, with young people in their 4, 5, 6-year-old ages seeing these creatures. Right.
And they seem, I don't know if it's because children are just looking more, their eyes are good and they're looking at their surroundings and open and fresh, or is it that we are born without a filter on this other world, and as we get older, we can see less and less, but when we're younger, and it's the same thing as dogs and cats have. If you've ever had a dog or your cat sitting staring in the corner and growling at something that isn't there.
That we think is not there, at least.
Right, we think is not there. Exactly. So it's not at all unusual for people to write me and say, I saw this when I was 6, 10, 11, 14, and I remember it just like it was yesterday.
And you go down and see Lindsay first and see how she cooks, okay?
All right, yeah, and I'll put in a request for no roadkill, too.
You'll be the guinea pig, Linda.
Exactly, as long as we aren't eating guinea pig.
Mention your websites, and you're on Facebook and Twitter as well, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And people, go ahead.
My main blog is lindagodfrey.com, and you can really find everything else right there.
Super, and we've got that linked up at coasttocoastam.com as well. Linda, thank you, my dear, for being on the program. Keep in touch with us, okay?
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all of your listeners as well.
If you want to listen to our show ad-free 24/7, access audio archives, live chat with me, and much more, you need to become a Coast Insider now. So you're telling me your grandmother, who died a few weeks ago, came and visited you last night in your bedroom, and you're not scared? Are extraterrestrials living among us? I don't know if it's true or not, folks, but we're going to find out. If you enjoy stories like these and want to learn more about the mysteries of the universe with me, become a Coast Insider now to access hundreds of our archive shows to listen anytime, anywhere. Sign up now at coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider. That's coasttocoastam.com/Coast Insider.